This is Annalisa Durr with Journey to the Goddess TV, regenerating ancient feminine wisdom for modern women. And today I'm here with Seana. Seana, I meant to have my notes out here. With Seana Zelazo. Hi, Seana.
Hi.
I'm going to give you a beautiful introduction here. And then we're going to go into an invocation and then the Q&A. So Seana Zalazo, LICSW, is an author, psychotherapist, intuitive channel, and spiritual coach. A licensed clinical social worker who holds an MSW from Smith College School of Social Work, Seana began her social work career in end-of-life care as a hospice social worker before transitioning into private practice as a psychotherapist. For the last decade, Seana has focused on providing clarity and support as an intuitive channel, connecting with the higher realms to offer guidance, spiritual coaching, and mentorship, as well as teaching. Trained in many healing modalities, Seana is also a former elite runner and two-time Olympic trials qualifier in the marathon, as well as a former competitive triathlete. Wow. As a surfer, today, Seana uses her relationship to sports as a medium to be in sacred relationship with the temple of the body. She lives in coastal New Hampshire, where she surfs with her sisterhood year-round. Wow, what a cool life. I love it. So again, welcome on the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And before we dive in, I also want to let people know that they can purchase your new book. It just came out, I think in September. It's called The Way of Inanna, A Heroine's Guide to Living Unapologetically. And it can be found on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and basically your book retailers.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Do you actually have a copy of it with you? I meant to ask earlier.
I do, actually. Shall I reach? Just
yeah,
give
go
me
ahead.
a second to just grab it.
Yes, absolutely. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell everybody at home to remember to like, to comment, to subscribe to the channel, and also to leave a comment. Okay.
Yeah. So here's the book.
Perfect.
And yeah. And yes, it's available at booksellers worldwide. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, and I highly encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy. It's a beautiful book, a beautiful meditation with 7 meditations, and it will empower you to look at your life in a whole new way.
Bless you.
All right, so now I'm going to invite you to give an invocation for us and for the audience at home.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through a little grounding meditation just to help us integrate and be fully receptive to this experience together today and just link us up together. And I'm just going to ask that this conversation that we are having together be done in alignment with the highest good and healing of all, and in dedication to and honor of the goddess. So I'm just going to invite you just for, it's a very short meditation, but just invite you to close your eyes if you're able and just bring your awareness to the seat beneath you and to the ground under your feet. And just imagine as you're feeling this support that you are being fully held and protected. And from here in your mind's eye, imagine that you're beginning to grow 3 strong tree-like roots that drop from both feet and from your root chakra, right at your tailbone. And just imagine these roots going down through your floor deep into the earth, and feel them anchor in to whatever you imagine to look like is your spiritual core. Any image that comes to mind is perfect. See those roots of yours anchor into your core, and know that in connecting with the core of you, you connect with the core of Mother Earth. And in her deep gratitude for this connection, she extends to you golden, healing, protective light from her heart, up your roots to your feet. Just feel this light rise. Invite your cells to open and receive as it moves up over your hips, across your stomach and into your heart. Feel it radiate out to your shoulders and watch it pour down your arms into your hands and fingertips. And then continue its ascent right up over your throat chakra, your jaw, and right to the center of your forehead. Here, see it expand like the sun, enhancing your capacity to always see the truth with perfect clarity. And finally, let it rise to your crown chakra at the top of your head. And just see it shower out your crown to fill your auric field. So now, all four of your bodies, your mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical bodies, are perfectly bathed and protected in this healing light. And from here, just take a deep breath in and out, using the breath to integrate and feel the connection with each other on this call today. And when you feel ready, just come right back into this space and open your eyes.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to share that I saw this beautiful pomegranate in my hands. And my point of view, actually, the visual was looking down at my hands like this as I was holding this pomegranate. And I just bought some pomegranates at the farmer's market today, because yes, I'm still in Greece. But, the fact that this was a meditation, guided by Gaia, and Gaia is an ancient Greek goddess, and Persephone, the pomegranate is related to the myth of Persephone. And it helped me really feel grounded here in this land and rooted in the myths here and the culture here. So
I love that. And I love that because that particular mythology is very connected to Inanna.
That's right.
In many ways, yes. So we love that.
Yes. So I would love to continue that thread, but I think first let's dive right into the first question, which is, who is Inanna historically? That's part one.
Yes, absolutely. So Inanna is the Sumerian goddess of love and war, and she has many epitaphs. So she's also the morning star and the evening star. She's the queen of heaven and earth, the goddess of thunderstorms and rain, and one of the seven gods and goddesses in the pantheon of the Sumerian lineage who can decree fate. So what is so powerful about Inanna is, and what struck me and drew me to her, is her willingness to accept her multidimensionality, and the way that she is so relatable, because in her I found a goddess that I see a lot of myself in the sense that she owns her polarities. And so she is both loving and fierce. And she is, she stands out. A lot of her mythology reflects her impatience. And I saw myself in that as well.
Of course,
for sure. Right.
Yeah.
So immediately I was pulled to her in that recognition, because she strikes me as someone, as a being who can show us our divinity while in human form. And she really insists on her physicality. That was something that struck me as well.
Right.
That was hard for me as a very young child. I would say my salient identity has been my spirituality since I was really little. And it always seemed a bit unusual that I was so connected to the body. So I've been an athlete, and I was a massage therapist for a long time. So the body is very important to me. And it was a bit challenging for me to understand early on my spiritual path why that was so, because it's sort of like all the information I studied seemed to point to the spiritual path as one that transcends the physical. And yet here she showed me, oh no, the body is the vehicle we're choosing in this lifetime to bring us to our ascension. And that's the other thing that struck me of her, is that she really is one of the original teachers of ascension. And her earliest myth, the descent of Inanna, is so profound for so many reasons. But the way that she in this story comes to the 7 gates of the underworld, it really was like these 7 initiatory phases that helped me in reading her mythology, helped me understand and reframe the challenges that I've experienced in my life as my gates or my initiatory experiences, so that it shifted me from feeling at times disempowered by those challenges into an empowered perspective. So my pull to her is for many reasons, but I would say the most significant is that she is so relatable, and she's providing us a practical example of how to own our divinity right here on the earth plane.
Yes, yes, I love that. Actually, I hadn't really considered that, but it makes so much sense, and it's such a great way of talking about this goddess and the potential that she, of that kind of human divine experience that she teaches. I'd also love it if you could give insight, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, because I know you actually speak quite a bit about this in your book, but we don't want to give everything away either. So if you could give some insight into a little more into your personal journey with Inanna, well, probably first to Inanna and then with her. Yeah, and what really drew you to her in the first place?
Well, so yes, I do go into I do have a section wherein I describe how she transformed me, and so I'll share about that. Well, certainly for me, as a young child, I came in interested in death, and for sure, Inanna is a goddess of the death mysteries, and we can sort of unpack that more. But as a young girl, I was interested in near-death experiences, and just very pulled to exploring that. And I had a mother who was really psychic and worked as a nurse and had a lot of experience with end of life in this realm, but also with folks that were in comas, and she would talk to them, and she would come home and she would tell me that she would, she would communicate with them, all this sort of thing. So in my home and with my mother's just clarity, she helped me see death as something that I wasn't afraid of. So the pull, I came to learn about Inanna a little bit after the most significant challenges I experienced in my life, which happened when I was 19, and they happened about a week apart. And so I know that was by design, in the sense that there was something around the how that wounding impacted both centers. So this was my mom ended up taking her own life when I was 19. And then about a week after that, I experienced sexual assault. And so to me, that, which I know is I know so many, unfortunately, right, that this is such a common experience, and unfortunately, and yet what I realized from that was the impact was in the heart with the grief of losing my mother, and in the second chakra with the sexual assault. And at first, of course, it led to, as a 19-year-old, it led to sort of this erosion of a sense of self, this sort of prioritization emerged that I needed to heal this. And that's what I mean, it felt by design, because it positioned me to do the inner work and to reclaim a sense of healing in those two centers. And this is very much what Inanna teaches. So when you think of the way the patriarchy impacted the feminine through history, if you look at it, and certainly in your work, your work around the myth of menstrual danger, this is really the emphasis is that the patriarchy targeted the second chakra, because that is the center of feminine power. So to experience that wounding is heartbreaking. So we have the second being wounded, and then it's heartbreaking, not only for us that have been violated, but also when you operate from feminine consciousness, you see how we're all connected. So it's not just our own experience of wounding, but we also are heartbroken for those that led to our wound, those that wounded us, or those that hurt us. So because we come to understand that we don't hurt unless we've been hurt, right? We don't perpetuate that. And so there was a deep heartbreak. And this felt like an opportunity. At 19, I truly believe Inanna was sort of reinitiating me onto her path. It feels like a path I've walked in many other lifetimes. And she was really positioning me, saying, okay, this is the work you're meant to do. And in order to do this, we have to heal these centers so that you can live what you're teaching. And really, it was like those experiences that happened in this now, in this current lifetime, certainly were painful, but it felt deeper. It felt like those were like magnets to the historical trauma I held in those centers from history. And ultimately, like the collective and individual targeting, vilifying, pathologizing, all of the things that women endured and the heartbreak that led to, but also the heartbreak of how that impacted our relationship with ourselves, so that we realize, when we have been told we're doing the devil's work enough, or we're crazy, or, whatever was used against us, or they're using our words against us, or, silencing us, that can become internalized. And then all of a sudden we're turning our back on ourselves. And that's heartbreaking. So the experiences I had at 19 felt like an opportunity to really say, okay, we've got to face this, and use these two very painful experiences to pull out the historical trauma, to release it and transmute it. So the pull to her was in it felt like a journey I had to walk, to remember.
Right. I know when I was reading that part in the book, I could like see what was coming, and I was like, no, no, like, it's like looking back on my own life too. It's like if you retrace like the steps that lead up to some of these moments, like of sexual assault, for example, you're just like, oh no. But what I would like to say, there were a few things that came up for me in what you said. And one is, again, how relevant Persephone feels to this story of death and kind of assault of one's, I'm going to call it innocence for a moment. And also, this historical trauma, or, let's call it trauma of this historical trauma of sexual assault that women carry, coming, maybe from past lives and or our ancestral lines, and or something that's experienced among women in every culture pretty much throughout much of history. So there's so many threads of healing, I'm sure, that come through you doing the healing work yourself. And then the last thing I wanted to put out there, which is now floating away from me right now, is that the death mysteries of Inanna and the feminine somehow seem intrinsically related to both our sacred female power center, the second chakra, and that assault that you're talking about, and this purposeful suppression. So I invite you to speak to any one of those points.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And absolutely, because if you look at it, looking at Inanna's mythology and her in her descent story as a teacher, as one of the earliest teachers of ascension, it isn't by design that she's also the goddess of love and sexual love. And, there's an indication of that. And if you just begin even just reading one of her myths, you can see how in touch she is with her second chakra, and just a comfort with and celebration of her holy vulva, and so that feels very much like there's a reason that that's important to her, not just because of pleasure. That's great and important as well, but it's also that it's a doorway, and it is a portal to the all. It is, it's a gateway. In so many ways, and it mirrors, of course, right? There's all the parallel between the birth canal and the way we exit the world and move through the bardo and all of that. So there's a correlation also, because in these many stories, in the story of Persephone and as well as Isis and Osiris and Jesus and Mary Magdalene, there is an emphasis on the way that the goddess is able to support in the ascension process, right? And how and why.
And can I just ask
yes,
a
please.
question here? And I think you define this in your book, but just for the listeners at home, what do you mean when you say ascension?
So that's such a great question, because it can be interpreted however you meet it in the now, whatever is resonant for you at this time. Certainly, it has been described, in the sense of with Jesus's process as resurrection, but it also is ultimately a movement from fear and the illusion to a level of existing in a state of love and in a state of claiming one's mastery. So it is it certainly can be literally experienced, from what Jesus was conveying in this sort of the process of dropping his physical body and rising. But this is accessible to us, in human form while we're in our body, is as a shift in consciousness where we decide to move beyond fear and move beyond the illusion. And ultimately, it is a rebirth. So
Right.
it's the rise.
Something just occurred to me in that moment, because, in much of the Western Christian tradition, ascension or transcendence really is the word that would often get used, was to connote the leaving of the body, because the body was bad and sinful. And I love the way that you're describing it, because it includes the body. It's actually like ascension happens through embodiment, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a way that the death mysteries teach us, prepare us, really, ultimately, even when you think of meditation, it's a preparation on some level for our transition, because it invites us to practice all the time non-attachment, 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 so that as we come to the end of our life, we're able to engage in, or we are able to exist in non-attachment and be able to move with ease through our process. And that's so, so important. But the shift is a shift. So the shift in consciousness is like a shift in vibration, and we can use our physiology to support that shift in vibration in how we nourish it and how we talk to it and how we, engage with it. So it works with us just in the same way it works with you in your craft as an actor and me as an athlete. It's certainly, if you look at an athlete, you can see her commitment, her drive, her will, her focus to bring her across the finish line, but she's in her body getting there. So it's working together. So absolutely the embodiment, but there's something also so significant about that it's hard. This is a hard plane of existence. And when we can be in the body and do it, wow, have we arrived? So
right.
It's just helpful.
That's right. Okay. So another term and theme that comes, that threads through your book is this, the divine feminine consciousness. So how would you describe that Inanna and her myth represent this divine feminine consciousness?
Thank you for that question, because it's an important one to unpack, in the sense that divine feminine consciousness to me is unity consciousness. It's a consciousness of oneness, and it's also a consciousness of responsibility. It's one where we recognize that we are co-creators. So when we are residing, when we are embodying this consciousness, we are intentional about what we're creating. And that's what I mean by being responsible. If everything that, if we move and always choose from a place of love, then that which we're participating, every brushstroke that we add is incorporating what we've intended to be there. We're not just operating unconsciously and unconsciously adding fear or, our own wounding unintentionally, but instead we're being very, very deliberate about engaging in a way that supports our process and the whole. So divine feminine consciousness is the opposite of dominance. It's not about having power over or sort of saying, get out of my way, other forms of consciousness. It's saying, let's exist together, let's support each other. And that's very different, but it is what the earth herself needs at this time. And as such, it is what we need at this time. So
yes, because we are her children.
yes, absolutely. And Inanna represents this in her mythology because she really emerges as what I see as she refuses to be bound. She does not want to be confined. She does what she wants and she knows what she wants. And she is in her heart, like in order to know what we want, we have to have a fluent dialogue, and we have to be fluent in the language of our own heart. We have to know how to hear it, what it is saying. And that's part of her emphasis. Because she is goddess of love and she does what she wants. It's that implies that she's fluent in this language. And that's something that is so important for us to understand, because ultimately, if we are co-creating with intention, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to know exactly, we don't have to solve the great questions of the universe. We can just always come back to love. It's very simple. In every choice, what's the most loving choice I can do right here? And that's it, and yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
And I was just thinking too, I think sometimes I've even been not guilty, but, I have thought this way that sometimes love, we have a very kind of, I think, a very limited way of understanding love in our culture. I was thinking about this recently because, like the ancient Greeks had actually like 6 words for love. I remember like none of them right now except for agape and like philia, something like that. But I was like, that's the sign of a culture that understands complexity and nuance of relationship in a way that ours doesn't. And so I'm bringing that in because I think it's also worth saying that when we talk about love, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think that love is complex, and it doesn't always mean just like compassion can have boundaries, and compassion and love can, it doesn't always look fuzzy and happy and, with pink and bows and, you get what I'm saying.
I do. I so appreciate you saying that, because indeed, like if you look at what is truly, truly loving, it is coming from a desire it's coming from a desire for the highest good for all, and Inanna does this a number of times in her mythology, if you really unpack it. And that to me is the true love. It's not that it does connect with the love we have for our children. Certainly, when we think, a lot of times people would use that as a frame of reference, but it by no means means just that kind of love, or that only a parent has access to it, or whatever. It's the energy of, when you engage with your child, you're not prioritizing you. I mean, you include yourself lovingly, but what you're prioritizing is the whole big picture always, and I mean, as much as we can, because we're human.
Right.
But so it's so useful to make that distinction. And to your point about the boundaries, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that, even the act of erecting boundaries, sacred boundaries around ourselves, is an act of love, for all the reasons. but it's a gesture of self-love for sure, but also it supports the other as well,
Right. Right. And I think that Inanna represents that very well. And, the Hindu goddesses, there's other traditions that represent that well. And I was just as trying to file through my brain, I was like, does Christianity actually represent that at all? I'm not sure. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if they have any teachings around boundaries.
Right. If anyone would, I would say Mary Magdalene. Because
Exactly.
yes, definitely, yeah. I think she's got it.
That's right. She does. And she's back now. She's back now. And she's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
you thought I was
Oh,
missing for 2,000 years, but I've been here.
that's right. Right. Exactly.
Um, okay, great. So I think, yes, what my question is, how can women learn to embody this divine feminine consciousness, and how is it relevant for the modern woman? So that, and I think generally as well, and just please answer whatever you want here. Like, why why is Inanna relevant for modern women?
Oh,
And her
yeah,
mythology? Yeah.
absolutely. Well, for one, I think we can answer all of it in the sense that Inanna's relevance is that she shows us that there are no parts of us that we need to disavow. So yeah, she's impatient, but she's also a goddess, and she's intending for healing, and she's such an amazing, she prioritizes gifting her people with power, right? And this is the idea that she can be both and the goddess of love and war, right? That's so us in the sense that we can be so generous with our love, and also know when enough is enough and say no, and so that's that fierce energy, that warrior energy. So she's, in part, why it's useful for her to re-emerge now is she's showing us, as the planet is going through this very significant shift, she's really reminding us, she's just circling back, and she's saying, so look at how we can do this. You don't need to leave your body, but you do need to love your body. You need to love you. You need to remember to love you. And that's where I would say that women can begin to embody feminine consciousness by prioritizing their healing. It's also, there are so many ways to do this, right? But even when we set the intention, when we just, in this now moment together, as we are here today, if we just look sort of internally and say, okay, I'm ready to heal, we're starting that, and then the opportunities for that healing will come to us because we've truly intended it, and called forth that support from the higher realms, from our higher self, from us, so creating the space and committing to dedication to begin the journey of self-love is one way that women can connect with divine feminine consciousness.
Yes. I love that you brought up that women healing ourselves and healing our relationships to our bodies and the feminine is actually doing the, not just spiritual, but the kind of transformation that the world needs.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think that's really important. And it leads us into the next question around womb wisdom, which is another central theme in your book. And obviously it's something that, I also feel very connected to with regard to the goddess Inanna.
Totally.
And so from your perspective, and I'm sure from your own experiences too with the goddess, what does she have to teach us about womb wisdom?
Oh, such a good question, because, first, again, her prioritization of her own pleasure, her mythology is so erotic and just beautiful. But my favorite of her myths is Inanna and the God of Wisdom, because to me, that captures womb wisdom on so many levels. Now, the myth can be interpreted many different ways, but to me, the opening scene is she's leaning back against the apple tree and she's gazing at her holy vulva, and she literally applauds herself. And to me, it's just so lovely. I love that section. But it then segues into what she does next. So the fact that she does this first, to me, is very noteworthy, because it's, to me, like She's tapping into her sacred feminine power. She's about to use it. So it's her tuning in process. It's sort of like a pump up song. We might use as an athlete, we got to get in the zone. And
Yeah.
she's just going right to her second chakra. And she's celebrating it. She's like, I feel it. It's coursing through me. I am in the zone. And what she does next is also a reflection of womb wisdom, which is she's looking now to empower her people. So she's like, she gets the inspiration to go visit her grandfather Enki. And, whether she's conscious of it or not, really her pursuit is to acquire the sacred powers of the land from him that he possesses. And this is the part where it can be interpreted in different ways, which is, of course, why I love her mythology. But it has a lot of interpretations that I read about the sort of next part is that she goes there and together they drink beer and he gets really inebriated, which I totally do dig that beer is so central because it's funny to me. It's just very funny. It just seems like, it stands out to me because it also says, don't take things too seriously, but anyways, she goes.
Yeah. And I have to say, I remember reading at some point that sometimes the taste of beer is likened to women's sexual fluids.
Oh, so interesting. I have not made that connection. Thank you. Yeah. Absolutely. Totally. And that next step people have kind of seen as her being manipulative. I don't see that at all, right? I see her going, I've just dialed in. I know what I want. And what I want is to support humanity. I want to help my people. Very womb wisdom, because it's connected to feminine consciousness. It's connected to feminine power, which is about uplifting and recognizing our oneness. So she goes to receive these sacred powers, which he gives her. And then she puts them all in her boat of heaven and hurries back to her city to dispense that, to share them. Meanwhile, Enki wakes up and sobers up and looks around and asks his servant, where are my powers? And his servant tells him, you gave them to the goddess Inanna. And he's, all of a sudden he's remorseful. So he sets these creatures on her to try to get them back. This is, again, all womb wisdom, because she, in her process, her and her guide, her counselor, Ninshubur, successfully ward off these creatures, which is essentially like her saying, you know what, this is your wounding. I'm not carrying it. Here you go. I'm giving it back to you. And it's healing for him too, which we see in the end, because ultimately he ends up showing up when she docks, unloads her boat of heaven with all these powers to gift to her people. And he shows up and he blesses her city. So you see that he has transformed as a result of womb wisdom. And the people, it's like this perpetuation. She's saying, look, it helps us to, once we access power, to empower. It doesn't serve us to hold it for our own self-aggrandizement. So everything about that story feels so symbolic of the wisdom of sacred feminine power. So that's how I see her.
No, I love that interpretation. And I remember reading in your book that you even mentioned those waters as like amniotic fluids and like a birthing, because when the demons are chasing her, there's this great kind of flood. She floods them out.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That's what I love about her stories too. Absolutely. The rebirth energy, but her stories have such it's so poignant, even though it was written so long ago, and it's so relevant today, and it's just so beautiful, so transcendent.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, absolutely. I do. I love that kind of like when we look back at like the ancient world, sometimes we're like, oh, they were so like, there's like this magical like layer that we kind of cover it with. But then when you really dig in deep, you're like, they were just a lot like us, just people.
That's
trying
right.
to live their lives and figure out why we're here and make up stories about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was great. So, okay, another one of my favorite themes that runs through your book, and you've brought it up several times today as well, is this kind of concept of heart. And I was particularly touched by the way that you described the role of the heart in the grieving process as well. And we talked about this before we started. I was saying that a friend of mine had, one of my best friends had passed away rather suddenly. And one of the things that I kept saying over and over again is, my heart is broken. That's like all I could say. And when I wrote my faculty to let them know, one of them responded that basically with the phrase that the heart of wisdom is a broken heart. And I'm like passing that on more and more, because I'm finding that there's a lot to intuit into that. And for me, I've done that myself, but I wanted to share that because the heart does seem central to the grieving process. It's a central organ, and it's a central mediating, space spiritually as well. So let's just start with that, like the heart and the grieving process and Inanna.
Absolutely. And first of all, I'm so sorry for what you have gone through with that, and also feel, I know you feel, because you're so intuitive, how your friend is so at peace. I can feel it in your field. Yeah. That that.
Yeah.
So, but there is such wisdom in what your faculty members shared, because in the way that the heart breaks, it expands so much, like the hips that widen when we give birth, they spread to hold the baby. And it's so much like that. When we go through heartbreak, it does allow for us to feel the vulnerability that is required to transform. Ultimately, it just levels all our defense mechanisms. So we're vulnerable enough. There's nothing stopping and saying, but, we just go right into the healing. And ultimately, sometimes that's what's needed. Sometimes we need to be brought to our knees in order to finally let go of the defense mechanisms so we can heal. So it's very powerful. Her wisdom highlights this in a lot of ways, in the sense that, of course, in her descent story and in the return, when she rises, there's ultimately a shift in her that occurs for her beloved Dumuzi, who initially she's quite, sort of like annoyed with, in the sense that what I interpret that is that she sees him in his being hooked a bit by power, by his role as king. And she's like, oh, no, this cannot do. If you're going to be in a role of leadership, you must be initiated. Like, we need you to be balanced. But she also feels the grief his sister is experiencing about what ensues. And it helps her to open to that. This also happens with her sister self, however you want to describe it, Ereshkigal. So ultimately, the grief process is a beautiful point when you think of her mythology as highlighting sort of the end of her journey. It's not that there's ever an end, but the sort of masterpiece of her own ascension, and it sort of comes back right to the heart in order for her to rise. That's so indicative as a message for us to take to heart, because ultimately what is conveyed there is that the heart is the most magnetic aspect of our whole being. And, the Heart Math Institute, the work of Greg Braden, all really does this scientifically, and it's such beautiful work. But ultimately, everything that's in our heart is what shows up in our reality, right? So the things that we believe about ourselves, the feelings we have about ourselves, and what we expect, it all resides here. And like a computer program, it creates the reality we experience. So it serves us. This is a message to say, okay, so hey, let's pay attention. What's in here? Does anything want to be upgraded? Are there erroneous beliefs that you're carrying unconsciously? Because even if you're not aware of them, they are impacting your reality. And if we're endeavoring to, if the heart is that powerful and we're moving towards our own ascension, she's in effect saying, so look in your heart, allow your heart, bring your attention to your heart. If again, there's one instrument that's going to support us in telling us where to step, where to turn, it's the heart. It's like an internal GPS, and she's highlighting that for us. So of course it helps us to, when you think of heartbreak, right, when you go through something like that loss you went through, it gives us an opportunity to pause, to have the heartbreak, to have it effectively break apart, to then hold more love, but also to say, what resides in here that's no longer resonant? And what are we ready to release and heal? And that's the upgrade. And when we prioritize this, then going forward, we are able to trust the steps that we take, because we know we've become conscious of what's here, and we just accept what shows forward, what shows up for us, and that's a big piece, because it goes, the acceptance supports non-attachment. If we can just accept what shows up. And that's part of so much of the death mysteries, this process of purification that shows up in so many of the different death traditions, and the myth of the dying and resurrecting god or goddess. And ultimately there's this process in the initiations taken by priests and priestesses throughout history around this, of purifying, in your neck of the woods right now in Greece, right? Like the Eleusinian rather, mysteries around the lesser mysteries that are taken in the spring, and then the greater that are taken in the fall. The lesser are meant to purify the initiate to be ready for the greater in the fall, right? So this is very in line with what Inanna does in the experience of the 7 gates. To me, she comes to each gate and she has to take off an item of clothing. And that is her process of purifying. And what I've explained in the book is just sort of this opportunity to heal our energy centers, to look within and say, am I holding any wounding in any of these centers? Because if I am, that's going to be a form of attachment. So how can I purify? I don't mean purify in the sense that there's something wrong with us. I mean purify in the sense of lifting our vibration, moving from the density of wounding to the vibration of love and healing,
Right. And so I wonder too, like I can speak to my experience still being in like the cracked open experience of heartbreak, like that. I think people have a choice where they can either allow themselves to, and I think this is what you're saying, to feel that heartbreak and to allow something new to arise, to maybe question old patterns or old thoughts or beliefs. And yeah, allow yourself to transform into something new, or allow something new to arise.
Absolutely.
But it seems like maybe, and I don't know if this is true, I don't know if this is accurate, but it also seems like a lot of people are afraid to do that.
For sure. Absolutely. And rightfully so, because it's deeply intense. And I think one of the most important aspects to the healing process is the felt sense of safety. And that's such a priority, right? So certainly, like, if there's a resistance that arises, if we're going through that kind of process and we notice this big resistance, is it that we just will be better supported by accessing, guidance or someone else that can help us feel safe, whether it's a therapist or whether it's a healer of some sort, that may be what we need. But we also have our own timing with our own healing. And we're going to know, we might have to say, you know what, this is really intense right now. I need to press pause. And I'll come back to that at some other time. That's okay too, right? Being just aware and intentional. You can be intentional. You can say, you know what, Spirit, I need a minute. I feel so traumatized. I just need to reconnect with feeling grounded and safe. And I'll re-explore that opportunity later. And we have our free will allows us to make such a choice,
Um, and something else that I wanted to bring into this conversation on the heart too, is this phrase from the Gospel of Mary, and there's a similar phrase in the Gospel of Mark, and that is, where the heart is, there lies the treasure. And that seems to be actually kind of the crux of, what you bring into the book around this heart and love and transformation.
I love that. I love that so much. And I love how much Mary Magdalene emerges as herself, such a profound teacher of ascension, but she's showing us, she's giving us this information about she's literally saying, all you need is this directional signal, and because if everything that resides in our heart is what shows up in our reality, then we can use our second chakra to access our creative energy, to use our unique process, engage in our unique way to bring about heaven on earth, that merging of the second and heart chakra. But the heart ultimately is if we choose from consciousness, from the recognition that we're all connected, and ultimately from a place of love, then what happens is our reality begins to reflect that. But also, and this is very central to Inanna's mythology and what I hear in that beautiful phrase, which is this emphasis on self-love, because it always starts within to play out without, and what I see in that wisdom is that if we think of ourselves as an instrument, and self-love is the harmonizing process that we use to tune that instrument, then every note that's played off of us now carries forth that harmony. So that's how I see it, as it begins with us. We have to heal what's blocking our own ability to love ourselves unconditionally, so that we can move through the world reflecting that,
Right. Right. And that journey is going to look different for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of the combination of the heart and the second chakra, is that the second chakra being the creative center, it's our unique brushstroke, our unique tone, our unique, expression, and then with intention, bringing that forward and seeing how what we do impacts the whole, and taking responsibility for that.
That's right. Okay, so moving on, you describe 3 concepts at the end of your book, 3 concepts for integration. The first one is the ability to drop all inner and outer judgments, just really important on the way to self-love, right? 2, the capacity to work with the spiritual principle of grace, which I also love. And some people might have a little kind of hesitancy around that word grace, but maybe we can unpack that word too in just a moment. And number 3, the ability to have a deep understanding of the death mysteries, which we've talked a little bit about, by learning how to live fully and take care of your unfinished business. So before we get to number 3, is there anything that you'd like to touch on with regards to inner and outer judgment and or the capacity to work with the spiritual principle of grace?
Absolutely. So especially in the process of, I was going to talk about the balancing of karma, that when karmic processes emerge to be reconciled, the best way, in my observation, is to meet it with grace. And that doesn't mean that it has to look graceful. Like, it might on the surface look like we just tripped in front of the whole audience, like it doesn't necessarily have to look graceful on the outside, but it has to be graceful to yourself. Are you engaging gracefully with yourself in the way in which you handle challenge, karmic processes? Because, if when you're engaged in a karmic process of, when we're moving through something karmic, because it's intense, and it's sort of like, because you get pulled into it, and it's this very, very overwhelming experience. But when you find yourself in such an experience, if you just remember, okay, What's the most graceful way for me to interact with this? Again, with the self. And also, the sort of the idea of the law of grace is that we can ask, we can pray, we can ask for support to be, given to the planet to protect, humanity and all the beings on the planet. But when done under the law of grace, it ensures that we're not violating the free will of those individuals, that we're not taking away a lesson that will lead to their growth. So grace has multiple different interpretations, but in the sense, it's ultimately, it very much looks like when we imagine a dancer dancing across the stage in a ballet performance, and that grace, that's very much what it feels like energetically. There's flow, there's an honoring, there's a reverence, there's an attention, there's respect. So can we show up in this way for ourselves, is what I mean. And then the unfinished business and everything that's taught in the death mysteries. The death mysteries really are, as we've been talking about, really the teachings of ascension. But ultimately, we live in such a thanatophobic culture. There's so much fear around death. And as such, it runs the risk that we come to the end of our life in a way where we don't feel maybe as prepared as we could. And so when we lean into the death mysteries, what we're really doing is they're not just a teaching for what happens as we drop our physical body, but how to live, because it's one and the same, sort of like what we were saying earlier about meditation. This practice of non-attachment, 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 come into the present, come into the present. This is the same thing. And it's saying, let go of fear. Now, ultimately, the capacity to take care of your unfinished business is significant as someone who has worked in end of life and witnessed people transition. I have seen that you cannot outrun your past. It will catch up to you. And that's not a threat, and that's not meant to make people nervous. It's just meant to say, let go of your fears, release yourself, give yourself the permission to be who you are, drop into acceptance, allow yourself to accept yourself, allow yourself the understanding that you're human, and we're doing the best we can, have compassion for yourself. But it behooves us to engage with our unfinished business in the moment. If something upsets us, is it worth us burying it? If something exists, if there's an energetic wrinkle between us and someone else, and it's kind of lingering, maybe it's time. It might be telling you, hey, it's time to either, forgive or accept, or sometimes this can be accessed, which I love so much, just by intentionally talking to the higher self of someone else. You don't even have to have an actual physical conversation, but it helps us so much to engage or to release ourselves from the attachments of that which isn't finished,
Right. Yeah, no, that makes, I can't even imagine. The stories you shared in your book were just so powerful and heartbreaking and beautiful and instructional for how to live a life well, how to live well. And I can't thank you enough for sharing that, because I think it's, again, in my own experience, the sudden death of my friend at the age of 53, it's like, you don't know. And he and I had unfinished business, toward the end. And I have a relationship with him that extends beyond the physical body. So
I can see that.
Yeah. Still not necessarily easy, but I trust in that. But yeah, there is something kind of so magical about those teachings, that it's like we can be present with each other now and, work out our stuff together.
Absolutely. And it was such a profound opportunity for me to be able to be with individuals transitioning, because it's such a sacred rite of passage. And really, honestly, it's beautiful. Like, I know that it might sound morbid, but even as a young child, my fascination with death wasn't from a morbid perspective. It was a curiosity of like, what's this all about? Like, what's behind this, and it's just like, it is like birth, right? So there is a way that it can actually even be celebratory if we can move beyond our fear. And I know that's so hard to access, but it's possible.
Right. I think it's like, this is why you bring up the descent of Inanna, because it so perfectly encapsulates those death and rebirth themes and celebration, dealing with your unfinished business and the transformation that occurs on the other side.
Totally. And what strikes me in her mythology that I think is so important is her faith. Because this is a world from which no one can return. And yet Inanna knows she's coming back. So that faith is so intrinsic to our process. And again, it's like she's underscoring that by exemplifying it,
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Thank you. Well, we're going to kind of move to a wrap up here. And I have one more question. Is there any parting wisdom or advice that you'd like to give women regarding Inanna and or living unapologetically?
Absolutely. The unapologetic energy too is really about owning your glory. It's about recognizing your worth and coming into a place of self-love in such a way that you will no longer hold any part of yourself back, that you recognize you are meant to be center stage and giving yourself permission to be there. So the wisdom is to remember the ways in which you are divine and have fun doing it. And one of the ways to do that is to always trust yourself. Ultimately, the message always comes back to you have the answers. That's the message of the heart. It resides within you. So trust yourself and own your divinity.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to be able to talk about a goddess that I, love and have spent a lot of time with someone else that has done the same.
Absolutely. So, thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So before we go, I'd like for you to share where people can learn more about your work and find out about your classes, or just generally speaking, what you do.
Absolutely. So you can find me at my website, which is seanazalazo.com. And I do have a podcast coming out that is called The Unapologetic Heroine. So look for that. It's coming in the very beginning of December. And certainly the book is available at booksellers worldwide. And reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Yes. Excellent. And do you do individual private readings? And
I do.
Therapy as well? Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm not doing the psychotherapy so much anymore. I'm doing coaching and the readings, which is so fun.
Okay, good. Okay, because I'm glad you're doing what
so fun.
Your heart seems to do. Fantastic. Well, with that, I would like to say thank you to you again. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And for everybody at home, again, please please share, please leave a comment, and please subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to my newsletter as well, because that way you can stay up to date with the latest goddess news and episodes and upcoming episodes as well. So with that, I will say adieu and ciao, and we'll see you next time.